And this lady came over to me and was like, "Oh, you're the girl that plays football. You're going to come play rugby for me in the spring." And I was like, okay.
I think it's really important as referees that we recognize the role we play in that, most specifically when dealing with our age grade players.
How can you go about explaining why you haven't blown the whistle? How can you help players not make decisions that they don't want to make? How can you interact with parents on the sideline and explain to them, like, hey, here's how I'm going to referee today? Particularly in those, World Cup semifinals, those games where, there is lots on the line, like that's a real sort of sense of purpose to be like, I really do feel I'm the right person to be able to deliver what this game needs. It breaks my heart to think that someone doesn't realize that I care about the game as much as they do. Like when they're shouting at me and when they're saying these things, I'm like, what? I don't understand. Like, how can you not see how much I care? How can you not see that I also love rugby? Like, why are you making me the bad guy?
One of the things I wrote here is unsung heroes, and it's something I think about often, that refereeing is really one of the hardest jobs on the field. Like, what is the motivation? Like, what drives you? What satisfaction do you get from this role?
Yeah, I think...
Hello, my name is Kyla Colbin, and welcome to Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Maggie Cogger-Orr. Maggie is a legendary rugby referee, seriously legendary. She refereed the World Cup in 2021. She refereed the Paris Olympics last year. She was named New Zealand Rugby Referee of the Year. She is the bomb. In this conversation, we talk about the 3 pillars of refereeing. We talk about how to hold players accountable without escalating their anger. And we talk about the crucial role of self-awareness in any leadership context. Seriously, no matter what your leadership context is, I promise you will take away gold nuggets from this conversation. I took so much away. I can't wait for you to listen. So here you are, my conversation with Maggie Cogger-Orr. I gotta say, I'm so excited for this episode because you're the first referee that I've had on the podcast, and your whole job is holding people to standards. And so I'm so excited to hear how you do this in a way that is not about anger, which is, I think, what so often people think of when they think about accountability, but which is about invitation to be at your best. So that's where we're going to go. But can we start? Can you just give me a little bit of the Maggie Cogger-Orr origin story? Like, tell me a little bit of your background. Where'd you come from? How'd you get here?
Yeah, it's not a weird one, but it obviously is not necessarily probably the traditional referee, certainly not in New Zealand origin story. So yeah, I've obviously got the funny accent as well. So I'm originally from Canada, so I grew up in a few different places, kind of in Ontario, but started playing rugby and sort of spent middle school and secondary school up in Ottawa, and sort of had been playing boys, like Canadian football, but gridiron football. I don't know. For some reason, when I was like 13 and I went to secondary school, and the little flag came in the mail being like, "Oh, preseason football starts the week before school," and I looked at my dad and I was like, "I'm going to do that," and he was like, "Okay." Sure.
Was it like it wasn't very common for girls to be playing that sport at that time?
No, there's always like one or two sort of every few years that make the newspaper and stuff like that, but not really. Probably, and this is obviously, I'm dating myself. This is the early 2000s, so this is at the time it would have been maybe a few kickers playing, but I can't kick, so that was not what I was going to be doing. I was like, I'll be like one of the people that has to make tackles because I can't really catch either. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go do that. So that was fun, again, like a bit of a weird, exciting opportunity. And then that was in the fall season, obviously. And so then, midway through the fall season, this lady came over to me and was like, "Oh, you're the girl that plays football. You're going to come play rugby for me in the spring." And I was like, okay, I kind of vaguely knew what it was.
Is rugby common in Canada?
Not hugely common. It's I went to a private school, so it's a little bit more common in the private school stream, just because obviously the English sort of background. And because it's much cheaper to play than football, we do sometimes, like a lot of high schools will have a rugby team because it's just easier than getting a $200,000 worth of helmets and pads. So, you know, I had some idea what it was, but probably not a huge understanding. So turned up to that in the summer, you know, leading into the spring season. And I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This is so much better than football. I like this so much better.
What was better about it?
I think rugby as a concept, like the player empowerment is much higher. Like I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved the challenge of football and being able to probably more from being a girl playing like amongst all boys. Like I love that challenge, but it is very coach driven. Like the coach tells you what to do. Like this is the play you're going to run, and then you're going to stop and you're going to come back and I'm going to tell you the next play to run. There's very little player agency. There's very little sort of on the fly decision making. It's much more a skill execution sport. Like I will tell you the skill, you go execute the skill, and then I will tell you what to do next. Whereas rugby.
Can I test my understanding here? Because it's hard to overstate my ignorance of sports, full stop. And I do, even though I work in the sports area and do a ton of work with the Crusaders, UCR Crusaders.
Yeah.
But here's my understanding is that American football, gridiron, the way that it works is you line up, you execute pretty much a play. That play results in a tackle or a touchdown or an interception or whatever. And then play stops and you regroup and line up again and execute the next play. Whereas with rugby, you are going from phase to phase to phase to phase until there's a penalty or someone goes out of bounds or whatever. And so as a result, by virtue of the structure of the game, the players have to have the ability to have that agency, make decisions on the fly. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by nature of, because you could probably argue that in football, the coach, even though they go sort of in short 10 to 15 second chunks, theoretically, the players could call the plays. Like the players could be the ones who decide what they do next. But that's just not where the sport has sort of evolved to, because even in rugby, even at the stoppages, so for instance, like when there is a stoppage and there's a scrum to reset the play, it's ultimately the players on the field who decide what strike move they're going to run. There's no coach coming in on a microphone. There's no one, don't get me wrong, there's people shouting their thoughts and opinions, but it's not necessarily the same level of the distribution of decision making. I think is just very different in rugby. And that really, not surprisingly, as a 13-year-old girl who didn't really like being told what to do, I think that probably spoke to me, spoke to my soul a little bit. So, so I sort of jumped in sort of head first, which is a little bit also a personality trait that has emerged of me over the years. I tend to be a bit of an all or nothing person. So, sort of pursued rugby, kind of immediately really enjoyed it. Was really fortunate to be involved in sort of the representative program over there for Ontario, for my province, and then ultimately for Canada at sort of an age grade level. And then I got a scholarship to play in university at McMaster in Hamilton, which was amazing, a real sort of formative place in my upbringing. Unfortunately,
Hamilton in Canada or Hamilton here in New Zealand?
Hamilton in Canada, the classic colony. There's like 4 names that we seem to use. So my parents also now live in Newmarket, Canada, which there's a Newmarket in Auckland, like 20 minutes from where I live now too. So, so went to school in university in Canada, and unfortunately, while I was playing there, I had 2 relatively quick back-to-back ACL surgeries. So 2 quite significant knee injuries that actually, though, at the time I was obviously very upset by, but were ultimately the reason I sort of got to give refereeing a proper go. So there was a sort of chunk of time where I was allowed to run, but I wasn't allowed to play contact sports, obviously for fear of sort of re-injury. So there were a couple seasons where I spent the summer refereeing as opposed to playing. Did really enjoy it, probably had a bit of a knack for it. Again, in terms of someone who sort of probably been called bossy a few times in my life. So probably not surprising that it was something that came a bit naturally to me. And so then I finished up at university, knew I wanted to be a teacher. So I'd done my 4-year undergrad, knew I wanted to be a teacher, was sort of deciding where to do my 1-year teaching degree. And that was when the opportunity to go to New Zealand came up. So Christchurch, obviously, after the sort of devastating 2011, 2012 earthquakes, in 2013, then started to recruit for international students to come back. So they sort of heavily discounted their international tuitions, which when you're making the decision if you're going to pay international fees or not is a big incentive. I decided that I'd go there for Teachers College. So in 2014, I moved to Christchurch and did my 1-year teaching degree there. And played, I went back to playing. I was only sort of 22 at the time, not ready to fully give up the ghost yet. So I went back to played for another sort of few years.
Who were you playing with? You were playing here in New Zealand. Who were you playing with?
Yeah, so I played for the University of Canterbury down there. So just the club team associated with the university. And then when I got a job, the next year I obviously got a job up in Auckland, and I played for College Rifles up here for 2 years, which is one of our sort of big storied clubs up here. Probably, well, currently about 4 of the starting 15 Blackferns are from our club. So pretty legendary status up these ways. So I did. I went back to playing. I had a good time, and then at 25, I sort of felt that I'd reached my upper limits as a player, at least in the short term. And I was like, I think I want to give refereeing a proper go. And have enough runway to see what I can do with it. So yeah, that'll be, 2016 was the last year I played. So 2017 was the first year I really got into refereeing. So yeah, 10 years ago, decided that I'd go sort of, again, not surprising, head first, all in on refereeing. And yeah, luckily I'm a better referee than I was depending on who you ask, but I like to think I'm a better referee than I was a player, to be fair.
This is so interesting. I have so many questions. One of the first questions I have is, when you first said that you went from gridiron to rugby and you liked rugby much better, I instantly made up a story that then you did not back up in any way. So I think my story was false, but I just want to test it, because I made up a story that I was like, oh, there must be something in the teamwork of it, in the connection, in the belonging, in the thing. And then you're like, nope, I don't like to be told what to do, and I just want to be the boss, and now I don't even want to work with a team at all. I just want to be the referee and tell everybody what to do. And so I just want to check your view on all that.
Listen, I think there probably is way more teamwork involved in rugby, because there is a lot more player driven agency, and there's therefore too much to do. So, I do think rugby does appeal to me because it is more about the people on the field and your willingness to have to work with different people who have different strengths and but equally are all sort of equal contributors to scoring tries. That's always something that I found hard to wrap my head around in football, that only a couple people get to touch the ball. That doesn't really feel fair, which is another probably value of mine. So, and then in refereeing, it's not probably the same amount of team, but really certainly at the highest levels, we try really hard that within the refereeing space, me and the assistant referees that I work with and the television match official I work with, we really see ourselves, and obviously the wider group of referees, we really see ourselves as a team. And even though it's not ultimately the same thing as the teams on the field, we sort of laugh sometimes, we never win. Even if you have a good day as a referee, you don't get to walk off the field feeling like you won the game, because that's not what it is for us. But we do work really hard to work as a unit on the field to ultimately deliver what we need to deliver to the game, which is it can be a little bit more challenge. It's probably not as simple as playing on a team is, where there's a real clear we won or we lost, and it's a bit easier in that regard.
in prepping for this, first of all, I'm so happy to hear that fairness is one of your values, because you'd want that from a referee, of course. But in the notes that I wrote, before we got on this call together, one of the things I wrote here is unsung heroes. And it's something I think about often, that refereeing is really one of the hardest jobs on the field. You're putting yourself in a position, and I think about kind of the abuse that the referees at the World Cup cop, when if people think they made a wrong call, or they should have, or they go back 5 phases because the TMO says we should only go back 2 phases, or whatever it is. And I just feel like refereeing is one of the most critical jobs on the field and one of the least appreciated jobs on the field. And so one of the things I'm most curious about with you is, you feel you're a better referee than you were a player. What is and I just heard you say that you and your fellow referees feel like you never win. What is the motivation? Like, what drives you? What satisfaction do you get from this role?
Yeah, I think I think it's an interesting one too, because like different referees will have different motivations, and certainly at a community rugby level, we get a lot of people involved because rugby or whatever sport they choose to referee or umpire, but certainly rugby has contributed a lot to their life, and they want to give back to the community and facilitate others being able to enjoy it. But I do think, to your point, like as you sort of go up the ranks and the pressures and the sort of what's being asked of you increases and the repercussions of your decisions increase, I do think, like for most people, if you unpick a little bit further, like for me, it really has been like, I choose to do it and continue to do it, because it satisfies a real sort of personal drive in me to like pursue excellence, to like see what levels of the game I can operate at, see what I can contribute to the game in terms of that like excellence. And it's a real sort of like satisfaction of the challenge of being able to sort of do that for me. And I do think, ultimately we continue to do it because we feel we're the right people to do the job that the game needs. Yeah, I think ultimately when you really feel that you can give the game what it needs, particularly in those, World Cup semifinals, those games where, there is lots on the line, like that's a real sort of sense of purpose to be like, I really do feel I'm the right person to be able to deliver what this game needs, so that ultimately the players can put on a spectacle for the fans. And I do think, when emotions settle down and when decisions are made, I get people are passionate, but most people with, the calmness of day, I think realize that like that is what ultimately all referees at whatever sport at that international level are trying to achieve. Like they are all actually just trying to do a job so the players can do what they want to do. But at times we do have to be I often think of it like a river has to have, boundaries. It has to have banks. Like, and sometimes we have to be the bank to be like, no, we can't do that. We're going to have to go back that direction. So, yes. And when it's your team on the receiving end of hitting up against a bank, I people don't always love that. But, that's a bit of a waffly answer as to why I choose to keep doing it, I guess.
I love it. I love that idea of banks. And the phrase that I use is enabling constraints. And without those constraints, nothing, it's no fun. Nothing happens. I watched a little clip of you. We'll put it in the show notes of you talking to representatives from two of the teams that you were refereeing. And you were like, if you keep this up, I'm going to start handing out free kicks and you're not going to like 50% of the decisions. And I loved that, the 50% of the decisions thing. I've got so many questions about when you get to the level that you get to, but I want to start a little bit further back. I've got 3 stepsons, 2 of them play rugby. And one of the things that delights me is when I see young people refereeing, like learning how to referee. You obviously started a little bit later in the piece. You'd been playing for quite a while. How do you learn how to do that? Is it like is there a training that you have to go to? Is it something that you pick up as you go? Like oftentimes, when the kids are little, as you will well know, it's just whoever's the coach steps in and does the refereeing. Like how do you get there to where you are?
I think it can be one where it sort of depends on which country you're in, to be fair. Like different places around the world have probably different avenues to get involved. So for instance, in Canada, just by nature of being sort of less of a rugby country, you sort of have to go to an official one-day workshop. It's like an 8-hour workshop. It's a bit of a like one-stop shop that sort of teaches you everything you need to know. And then the local referee association over there would support you in. In New Zealand, because we have sort of a bit more of a scale where you can access a referee association probably much more locally to you, because all 26 of our provinces have a referee association. There's sort of probably 2 entry points. So some people, if you sort of go, whole hog right to start with, you can just join a referee association, and they basically will sort of give you kind of like a personalized on-ramp. So they'll give you a bit of support. They'll be with you at your first game. You might shadow ref your first game. So you might just follow around someone on the field, vice versa. You might run touch for a little bit. And then to your point, where we often find people start their refereeing journey is when they're involved as a coach or a manager or something else, and then you're at that sort of age grade level and you then need to referee. So New Zealand Rugby, alongside all the different provincial unions, run basically an introduction to refereeing course that's designed to sort of give you a 2-hour window that sort of helps you with the real basics of, how to blow the whistle, how to move your arms in the right signals, what are sort of like your key roles and responsibilities, like what are ultimately you trying to achieve. And I think, the big thing for us, particularly at New Zealand Rugby, and certainly I know the provincial unions believe this as well, is particularly at kids rugby, like it is about trying to facilitate as much rugby as possible, as opposed to being perfectly technically accurate and being, exactly by the book. Like that's not what 8 and 9-year-olds want to do. Like they don't really care if you blew 50 penalties, even if all 50 of them were right. Like that's not what they care about. So, it's a real, that's a big support and focus for New Zealand Rugby and the provincial unions at the moment, trying to get more, everyone involved, but certainly like we would love to see more young people involved in refereeing, both to benefit them, even if they want to continue playing, like to benefit our secondary school players who could go and ref junior at their clubs or with their younger siblings or whoever it is. And also just other people who want to contribute, because we do have a real shortage at the moment of referees, and trying to get more people to volunteer into those roles is a real focus for us.
So one of the things I'm so curious about, and why I think people might be drawn to this, you mentioned there's a 2-hour kind of basics of how do you blow the whistle, how do you raise your arm. And so there's a component to refereeing, which is I have to understand the rules. I have to know the technical, tactical, like specifics of when do I call a penalty, what is a knock on, what counts as a held up, whatever all the specifics are. And then I heard you talk about at age grade level, the expectations and the purpose of refereeing might be different, obviously, to what it is at, test match level. Totally clear. There's a piece of this for me that refereeing is such an act of courage and leadership. And that when you are out there, your awake ability to go, what is the right thing to do in this situation? And how do I command respect from the players? And how do I become the banks of that river, not in a technical, tactical sense, but in a leadership sense? And I'm curious about whether in the training that you have, first of all, I'm curious about that topic generally. I'm going to dig further into it. But in that training that, in the one day that they do in Canada, or in the training, as far as in New Zealand, as people progress, how much, if any, is there of actually, here's how you hold yourself so that they might listen more. Here's what happens when the players continue to be distracted. Like, is there training in that piece of it? Because I imagine, especially as you get higher in the ranks, that would be much more of the job than the technical tactical, which probably many more people can do than the leadership piece.
Yeah, so it's like you're sort of like right on the right track there. So in refereeing, we will typically divide an on-field performance into 3 pillars. So you've hit on the first 2, which is like technical, which is, are you applying the laws correctly? Are you making the right decisions from a technical point of view? Tactical in terms of like, do you understand what the teams are trying to achieve? Are you sort of in flow with the game? And then the third one we talk about, which you've called leadership, but we just typically call management, but essentially is about like, how do you manage the game? How do you lead the game? How do you give the game what it needs? And actually, we were just talking. One of my colleagues at New Zealand Rugby and I were talking about that the other day. The importance of that pillar actually is at its highest in some of our newer rugby, where people are learning how to play rugby, right? Because ultimately, they need you to lead them more, because they don't necessarily have the skills to do that themselves. So really, to your point, is we do try to emphasize this in our introduction courses, is, how can you go about explaining why you haven't blown the whistle? How can you help players not make decisions that they don't want to make? How can you interact with parents on the sideline and explain to them, like, hey, here's how I'm going to referee today. Like, I want everyone to have fun, make as many, I want them to be playing. So there are going to be things that I choose to not penalize because we're at the under nines. So it's okay. And trying to have those sort of courageous conversations that set people up. And then, to be honest, we then go back to another point where even at that top level, there is still an importance on, well, how do you deal with those situations where you've said, people, tensions are high, players are, the further up you go, we're now talking about individual decisions can be game-winning decisions for individuals. Contracts are on the line, people's jobs are on the line. So understandably, there is a lot of heat coming on to those players. And I think we then also talk about at that top end, like, how can you as a referee, to your point, take ownership of that situation, be empathetic to what the person who's often shouting, this person who's in the middle of the throes of their sort of passions about how your decision is affecting them. And that's the real upskill, is like, how can you absorb some of that, be able to process it, respond to them in a way that is the right response, meets them at the level they need it to be, and also is still authentically you. That's a big thing we've probably tried to focus on from a leadership point of view in the last 5 to 10 years, I'd say, in refereeing, is there was probably a tendency to think like, well, if this person's a good referee, we should just have like cookie cutters of this person. Like, this person will just try to make everybody into that person. Whereas actually what we've really now found, which again, leadership and sports psych people are like, duh, but it's taken us a little while to figure it out, is like, actually the best referees are the people who are supported to be authentically themselves in that moment when the pressure is coming on, knowing that, we all still have a job to do, we all still have to deliver. But if you feel like you can truly be yourself when you're delivering that message, you are much more likely to have the confidence to navigate that situation than if you are play acting someone else. And I think for a lot of referees, that's what we try to support them with, is like, well, what does you at your best look like? And then how does that fit into what we ultimately need to deliver?
I'm so fascinated by this. Thank you for this context. Okay, so I heard you talk about the 3 pillars. We've got the technical, we've got the tactical, and you called it management, what I was calling leadership. So then when you're at that kind of test level, and you all apparently have been talking about this and developing this as a skill, this thing of like, okay, someone's coming at me, maybe their job's on the line, maybe the cup's on the line, maybe the weight of the nation is on my shoulders, all my dreams since I was a child are on my shoulders. And I heard you say, and you're trying to be empathetic to them and still do the job that you need to do and be authentically you. Is there any like specifics that you can share about how you do that? And specifically what I'm interested in, because one of the areas that comes up over and over again in my work is this area of how do we hold people to account with empathy? And there is a thing often that comes up in some of the programs that I run where people go, I want to empathize, but I still have to hold to account. And what I'm hearing you say is you can have total empathy for that while holding to account. How do you combine those two things? And the more specific your approach, the more useful it might be.
Yeah, I think it's never an easy question, and I think like that's part of the art of refereeing, we would call it, is probably the first thing we try to do is probably ideally we're not getting to a point where someone really has like blown up and lost the plot at us like shit, particularly in the context of you're on TV, because rugby is again, and I'm really proud of this. Like, it is one of the few sports that I do really feel like has its clear set of values around integrity, respect, and really continues to pressure teams and referees to uphold those values, particularly when we are on TV at a World Cup, when we are demonstrating our sport on the world stage. So, ideally we never get to a scenario where we're having to discuss with players about those values. But so for us, a lot of that comes down to, how did you, as a referee, how do you have a sense of like what the temperature is of a game? Like, how do you sense how the key personalities or the key people are feeling as the game is going on? And different people will require different things from you as a referee. So, a lot of the stuff that probably goes unseen, which is we want it to go unseen, is downtime conversations that you might be having with that person while someone's injured, right? So someone's injured over there, they're getting their knee strapped, and it's going to that person who you've just penalized and explaining like, hey, listen, here's why you got that wrong. Here's what I need you to do better. Like, can you understand what, like, trying to start to build in some of those downtime conversations so that they can see that it's not a me versus you. It's not like, that's not what this is. It's like, I want to be able to, if you do the right thing, I will reward you. But if you do the wrong thing, my job says that this is what I have to do as well. So building in those sort of micromanagement and different players need sort of different levels of that from a referee. So just like players do, and like they do, certainly at the top level, they're analyzing us as referees. They know we've all got our tendencies. I'm sure you've seen the Crusaders do it. We're the same, right? The more you ref in a competition, the more you know who sort of needs what from you, who you want to engage with more, who are the people maybe who are under pressure from a wider context point of view. And then ultimately, if that doesn't work, I do think like the biggest thing that probably helps us as referees is because rugby has those really clear set of values that we do all uphold ourselves to. And that anytime we're having those challenging conversations is like, I do always try to give the person a second to actually collect themselves. We're not having the conversation directly where whatever it is that's happened has happened. It's like, let's just go walk over there. Let's take a couple seconds here to just give ourselves a moment to get out of our lizard brain back into like, we're actually two human beings here. And then I do always try to lead with like, listen, I understand you're frustrated. I can see that you're frustrated. I understand this game has whatever game context we're in. Like, I understand this is a big deal. Like, I get it. However, it's unacceptable that you're going to speak to me like that after a decision. I'm happy to explain to you why the decision went against you. However, what I can't have is you shouting at me, demanding that I do something different or challenging my integrity. Because that's generally the one that is the most difficult situations for referees to deal with, is when you get players standing up being like, you're a cheat, how much did they pay you? Like things like that they don't actually mean. They're just sparking from a place of frustration and anger. And those are certainly things that as a referee, it's just actually like unacceptable that we allow people to think that that's something you can do on a rugby field. So I think the big thing for me is trying to give people the second to bring themselves back down to a little bit more of a centered place, knowing that it's never going to be perfect. And then also leading with trying to understand things from their perspective, to say, I understand what you're saying. I get it. I understand it's frustrating. I know this is a semifinal. I know this game means a lot to you. However, here's why what you're doing is unacceptable. Here's what we have to do to fix it. And then to your point, ultimately, here's what the consequences are going to be if you continue to behave like this. And that's actually that's not on me if you choose to do that. That's on you now. Like, so, it's never a conversation we want to have. And unfortunately, like you mentioned in the clip, like occasionally I think we sound a little bit like school teachers, when we're having it. But, I think school teachers, classroom management is probably some of the most you watch, particularly in primary school. So I think there's a reason that we tend to draw on them, because it's actually really impressive how they can manage people all at once.
Maggie, there's so much in what you just said that I've just taken away so many gold nuggets. One of the biggest things, and I think that is applicable to anyone in any kind of leadership position, whether you're in sports, whether you're leading a team of IT professionals, like any kind of leadership position, there is a huge thing that I've just heard in there, which is accountability does not require annoyance. And it might sound obvious, but I think so many of us feel like the only way to notice that someone is doing something wrong is to be mad or annoyed or frustrated with them. And one of the greatest leadership level ups I think we can make is what you've just described, the ability to go, actually, I kind of don't ever have to be mad at you. Like, I wrote an article a few years ago called "It's Not Your Employees, It's You." And the general premise was, if I've got somebody who's underperforming, I have three options. I can either like close the gap if they're willing and able to close the gap. If I'm willing and able, we've got the time, we've got the resource, the ability, all that kind of stuff. We can get the gap closed. Great. We close the gap. I can accept them where they are. if that's, again, a possibility, and maybe it requires a discussion, change in position description, REM discussion, whatever, or I move them on. And none of those three things requires me to be mad at the person. But what we so often do is we don't close the gap and we get mad at them for not being where we wish they were. And what I'm hearing you say is, actually, I can communicate really clear. Like, I can see you're a human being, you're doing your best, you're struggling, you're in the heat of the moment. I have compassion for all of that. And I'm going to be completely clear about the boundaries, and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, right? And I'm going to be completely clear about the consequences of those boundaries. And it's not about punishment, it's about consequences, right? Like, this behavior leads to this outcome. And that gift, like, it makes me feel, talking to you, I hadn't thought of this before, but it makes me feel like every leader should spend some time refereeing because if you can cultivate that ability to, I keep hearing you use words like centered and grounded. If you can cultivate that ability to be centered and grounded, and to see the humans in front of you with all their struggles and motivations in that moment, and also hold a space for where they can go and not go, what an extraordinary kind of leadership to be displaying.
Yeah, and I think it's not to say that referees are human as well. It's not to say that no referee is ever not annoyed or like that's a human response, right? If someone is shouting at you, the human nature is to be, particularly often when they're not right, when they're shouting at you factually incorrect information. But I think like we do, we're really fortunate, certainly in New Zealand rugby. We work with Jace McKenzie in the mental skills space, who works down with the Highlanders and does some work with Tennis New Zealand and has previously been involved with the Olympics. And at World Rugby, we work with a sports psychologist as well. And so the first step, I think, to your point, is to accept, like, and I've worked really hard on this, is, well, why am I getting annoyed right now? What about their behavior is making me actually feel annoyed or frustrated or like a little bit grouchy? And when I sort of unpicked it, I realized that I get annoyed because I find it like it breaks my heart to think that someone doesn't realize that I care about the game as much as they do. Like, when they're shouting at me and when they're saying these things, I'm like, well, I don't understand. Like, how can you not see how much I care? How can you not see that I also love rugby? Like, why are you making me the bad guy? And that obviously, like, that hits something really deeply for me. So it took a lot of time for me to be like, okay, that's why your reaction is tending to snap back at people, because I'm like, well, how could you think that? How could you? It's not fair. It's not fair that you think I don't care as much as you just because I'm the referee. And actually, now that I've been able to process that, to go, okay, that's why I feel that way. Just let that like wash over you for a second. To your point, take a second to be like, is this person actually, like, what are they actually upset about overall? It's not actually the decision. Like, of course, they're 10% upset about the specific decision. But what they're probably upset about is their team is losing a game that they really feel they need to win to make the playoffs. Like, that's actually what they're upset about. Or they need to play well today because their contract's up for renewal. Like, that's actually what they're upset about. So,
they messed up and they're mad at themselves.
100%. Like, they know that ultimately this penalty that they've just given away is going to cost their team 3 points. And that's actually quite a significant shift in the game. So I think, it's not to say that we don't ever get annoyed, because I think, like, human nature is, everyone gets annoyed. However, to take the time to be able to, and that's, I think, the challenge of refereeing that sometimes is understated, because, we do see some world-class operators who can process their own feelings, be like, cool, yep, put those aside, process someone else's feelings, yeah, okay, got that, and then have this very articulate, very calm conversation. And I think sometimes, because we see the top operators, the Holly Davidsons, the Ben O'Keefes, the James Dolmans do that, we sometimes don't understand how challenging it is that they've been able to deliver that, because they make it, just like any, impressive athlete, they make it look really easy. And then, to your point, I think the more people who gave it a go, even at a community level, would be like, wow, it's actually it's very difficult to be able to do that, and actually come across in a cohesive way and be able to, manage self, manage others, and then manage the game. I think is something that's probably understated, because they make it look very easy at that top end.
I mean, I'd put you in that group as well. Referee of the year. Like, I feel like this conversation is just going deeper and deeper into the core thing. And the thing I want to pick up on of what you just said, which is so powerful. I have this real view that all leadership is a journey of understanding the self. And, one of the lines we use in Dare to Lead is who we are is how we lead. And what I just heard you say that is so incredibly powerful is the player says something, shouts something, I get some kind of input, I feel triggered by it. There's work to be done, a curiosity of what is it in me that is reacting to this? And our ability to investigate that, because the temptation is always to go, well, I'm reacting to it because they said, and they're being mean and they're not nice or whatever. And this is true on the rugby field, but it's true in the office as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When we dig in, there is always a thing of like, well, they can be mean or not nice or stupid or whatever you want. That doesn't mean that I have to react to it, but I'm reacting to it. So what's going on for me? And then when I dig in, I find something like, oh, there's a core thing for me of like, can't you see how much I love the game? Or can't you see how hard I'm working? Or maybe underneath that, there might be a fear of like, maybe I'm not working hard enough, or maybe I'm not good enough at this, or maybe I'm not actually being fair, or whatever it is. And that the real work for each of us as leaders is the processing of that so that we can show up better in our context. And I think that is such a profound point. And I think it's a point that is often not made, that often, when we talk about leadership, we're like, okay, well, here's how to give better feedback so that you can get that person to stop being mean or stupid or whatever. Yeah. But it actually has nothing to do with that other person. It is that journey of self-discovery. And it's such a delight to hear you talk about that. And is that, you mentioned Jace McKenzie and other mental skills coaches, is that something that gets talked about like regularly in referee circles? Is that the message that you get to cultivate that?
Yeah, certainly. And again, this is a real shift, I think, particularly since Jace has come on board, is actually like, don't get me wrong, there's technical and tactical prep that we have to do as a referee, but a lot of that, to your point, like doesn't mean that much if you actually don't have an understanding of like what you're bringing into the context, what you need to, like how you're going to operate if in a certain challenging situation. So, Jace uses this really, sort of effective scaffolding, called it's like a pyramid structure. And we would say like, know me, be me, stay me. So again, the context of like, to your point, the bottom of the pyramid is actually like, well, who am I? Like, what matters to me? Why do I do this? What sort of are the actual key values that are really sort of to your point, like integral into who I am, and that are going to spark reactions when I feel that they're not being met or they're being challenged or whatever they are. And then again, that stay me piece is, to your point, like, well, when the pressure comes on, when I'm sort of starting to feel like, oh, now I feel like there's attacks or threats coming in, like, how do I actually stay me? And then sort of that like be me is the middle one, which is like, how do I display that as an authentic on-field persona? And then stay me. So at the top end of the pyramid, when it is you're making a decision in terms of, is this a yellow card or not? And it's the last play of the World Cup final. Like, how do you still ultimately be able to deliver that when all of that extra stress is coming on? So we're really lucky in New Zealand in particular that, Chris Pollock, who's our referee manager, like he sees real value in knowing that that's actually what, to your point, ultimately helps referees deliver at that top level. And that's part of why, of our top end, like New Zealand has a huge representation at the moment in the sort of top echelons of world rugby across the men's and women's game and the sevens space, because I think we receive that support locally, which then really allows us, when we go and referee in our world rugby colors, to be able to put out performances that, allow us to sort of display those skills. So we're really lucky that Jace and Polly do put a lot of emphasis on that portion.
What a gift. This conversation is making me so happy to know this is the kind of conversation that's happening at the highest levels of refereeing. To this question, you've mentioned a couple of times, we're human, the players are human, everybody's, of course, we're my favorite definition of human is that we're all just imperfect meat sacks stumbling through life. And so there's a piece there for me, which is how do you notice when you might feel, so when you do get that annoyance, and particularly what I'm thinking about is, in the kids game, we've got some, how am I going to say this? We've had some situations where we've gone, okay, well, that team is trouble. We have stories, right? Like that team is trouble, or our team might be the team that is trouble, right? And we just had a conversation at our club level where one of the things they were saying to us is, look, the referees all talk to each other, and we don't want to be that team that the referees go, oh, who do you have this weekend? Oh, it's that club. Oh, yeah, ooh, have fun with them. How do you deal with, and fairness is one of your values. How do you deal with the very human risk of having a lens on behavior that might lead to bias in calls or outcomes?
Yeah, I think that is the reality, is that experiences people have and the experiences of your peers obviously are a factor. We can't ignore that. I think the biggest thing, again, for me in terms of previous performances or previous trends from a team, like they only give you data in the sense of, if that happened to me, what would I do? I would do what that person did, or maybe I would do something differently. Or ultimately, if we're getting to a point where, to your point, maybe this team is trouble, or they consistently are displaying these sort of like big ticket issues, well, actually, how can I prevent, like, what role do I play in preventing that from happening? So yeah, ultimately that team has had 2 weeks in a row where there's been a fight on the field, or there's been some sort of push and shove. Well, and don't get me wrong, the players and the coaches take some ownership of that, but as a referee, like, I take some ownership of that as well, is because I'm confident generally there are signs along the way. There were opportunities for us to get off this train. There were opportunities for us to be like, I see where the game is headed. No, like, here's what we're going to do. Here's some baby steps that we can put in. And don't get me wrong, at youth age grade rugby, occasionally there are none. Occasionally we've got teenagers with developing brains. Occasionally someone just loses the plot in one moment. And that doesn't mean that kid is a bad kid, or that team's a bad team. It just means that kid had a bad day and someone pushed him or said something to him or her, and they reacted, and it is what it is. Like, so trying to see that for what it is, as opposed to, oh, that team is trouble, or that club is and I think that can be the temptation, and it's human nature, because it makes it easier. We just go, oh, that team, that box, I don't have to think about that anymore. But really trying to be like, well, I can plan for a situation, but trying to be not, oh, I expect that they're going to do that. Because I think that's the tendency, to your point, is when we referee, just like when we coach or when we teach or when we lead people, if we expect something to happen, we then get that confirmation bias of something happens and we go, gotcha. I knew you were going to do that, and now you did it. Even when, if you looked at that behavior neutrally, you'd be like, oh, that's not even what I thought that was, And that's sometimes, I think, where we can run the risk a little bit as referees, is we see things through a lens, and then we categorize it in a certain way because it suits what we wanted it to mean anyway. And I think that can always be a problem. And that's something where I do think we have to be like, we have to look at the behavior objectively. We can't just be, oh, because this team did that, I'm going to react like this. But if this team did it, I would react like this. And that, for me, is where the equity piece comes in. Like, for me, I'm like, well, everyone gets what they need from me, and that might mean that you need something different. However, like, I'm going to choose to perceive the behavior through a lens of like, it's just a behavior. It's not something that is attached to who you are. And again, it can be hard as well, because we have clubs that do that with us as well, right? Like, particularly in community rugby, the teams talk, like, rugby's not that big of a community, so they also are holding their preconceived notions about you as a referee from the last time they saw you, or the last time. So we are probably, everyone's navigating like what they the biases that they have about the people and the person involved. But I do think as a ref, it is really clear to be like, well, I can have a plan for what's happened with a particular club or team in the past, because that is the reality, that it has happened. And if it does happen, I have to have a plan to deal with it. But also I can plan for how I can work with that and to prevent it from happening in the future. Yeah.
You know, I love how much of this is about self-awareness and you know, we started this conversation. I was asking about accountability, like how do you hold the players accountable? But what I'm hearing is so much accountability for yourself, just total, like, I need to be accountable for if I'm showing up with bias, if I'm looking for, you know, confirmation of a preconception that I have of, you know, if I get triggered by something or frustrated by something. And that to me is where all the gold is. You know, I don't know anything about refereeing, but all the gold is in leadership and management, and you know, in having a life full of autonomy and agency and joy is that thing, that ability to kind of accept who we are and what judges. And I do want to just reinforce something that you said, which was, you said this a couple times, that, you know, the players are also looking at us and the players are learning how to manage us. And I've had those, Sam Whitelock in particular, I've had a number of conversations with him where he's like, and here's why we would, you know, engage in this kind of play, because who's watching us? It's the referee. Here's what we're trying to get from them. And I've had conversations with my middle stepson, who's 16, where, you know, he might come off of a game and complain about some calls the ref made. And we have those conversations where I go, look, the ref is human. They're going to make the best calls that they can make. If you want a certain outcome from them, what can you do to try to show up different, right? He's like, well, I got mad at the ref. Okay, what's that going to produce for you? Is that what you want? It's not that you're right or wrong to get mad. We all get mad. Yeah. What are you trying to achieve with it? And what could you do to try to get what you want? I do have a question, which is, you know, you're obviously at a stage in your career where you've been able to implement know me, be me, stay me, where you've been able to develop extensive amounts of that self-awareness. Can you tell me a story of a refereeing time when maybe it didn't go quite as well? Give me a learning experience here for those of us who are going, man, I wish I was as cool, calm, and collected as Maggie Cogger-Orr. That would be great. But I assume there surely have been moments when you've been put to the test.
Oh, certainly. I think I think refereeing is certainly something, and we often talk about this, like where you almost have to learn by making some of the mistakes. Like, we can run courses, we can talk to you, you can watch other people, but there's just some stuff that I think, just like playing, just like coaching, like until you've sat in it and made the mistake, like no better teacher than, you know, you make the mistake and you're like, well, I'll never do that again. And I think certainly when I started refereeing, to be fair, by the time I came sort of back to it, and by 25, I was probably a little bit enough of I thought I was a grown-up. I probably now look back and I'm like, oh, you weren't really a grown-up, were you? But I look back to probably, particularly when I was still in university and I was refereeing, like at, you know, so I would have been 19 or 20, and just like the unwillingness to see that anyone else could be right other than me, like, which is a real, again, like I have a bit of a mule head about me. And just like, I can remember, I'm sure I would have marched some poor secondary school kid, like, oh, no arguing with me. Now we're going to go another 10 meters. Oh, you're still arguing with me. I'm going to go into, like, just like no capacity in my own brain to be like, am I making this situation, like, am I contributing to this situation getting worse? Yes, 100%. Because I'm now going toe to toe in an argument with someone whose frontal cortex isn't even fully developed. So they actually cannot regulate themselves. And I'm just like throwing fuel on the fire to be like, cool, now I'm publicly shaming you in front of your friends. Oh, now we're down a debate as to like, oh, you want to keep going? We'll keep going. Like, I would have walked a kid, oh, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 meters down the field. Like, just one of the worst, like, what not to do in refereeing, basically, right? Like, rather than like try to mitigate it, try to give someone the opportunity to calm down. Like, I just met them exactly where they were at, and we just went up and up and up. So, which I think, like, I get it, like, probably in the old school way of refereeing as well. It was like, I'm the ref, you're the player, like, you won't do that. And, you know, we were very much all stick, no carrot. Whereas I genuinely, particularly when you're dealing with secondary school people now, I'm like, there's just no point in doing that. Like you're the grown up ultimately, right? And you have the responsibility. I mean, even when in adult rugby, like you're the referee. Like I do feel you bear the responsibility to take the heat out of the situation, not to continually taunt someone enough that eventually they'll say something that really now you're going to have to red card them. Like, and that's often. So I look back on particularly some of when I was refereeing at 19 and 20 and just like, oh my God, some very bad understanding of your contribution to a situation. So, yeah, it's certainly not without a lot of mistakes and errors that I've gotten to the point where I can try to absorb and say to someone, I understand you're frustrated, while they've just stood up and shouted at me. So yes, lots of scars on my back to get to that point.
Again, Maggie, so much profound insight in what you're talking about here. And this thing of, I think often when we're kind of newer to this sort of thing, the temptation is to be like, well, they just kept shouting. They just did this. They brought it on themselves. They wouldn't back down. They. And your awareness of actually every relationship is emergent from the parties to that relationship. And I can't control the other party, but if I transform how I show up, that relationship is going to transform. Even if the relationship is a relationship of 80 minutes, I've never seen you before, I'm never going to see you again. But, you know, we change 50% of the ingredients, the recipe is going to change, even if the other ingredients stay exactly the same. And depending on how I show up, we might end up walking back 60 meters, or you might end up taking some of the heat out of the situation and giving this kid a chance to actually reconcile and come back in and have a good game. That level of insight and self-awareness is rare and beautiful. So I really just want to kind of mihi to you for that.
Thank you. Yes. Again, I'm not saying I always got it right, but I like to think, because the reality is, like, certainly now in my impression is when particularly a teenager shouts at you, by the time you've gone time off, given them 10 seconds, walked over somewhere, by the time they get to you, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, miss. I'm so sorry. And you're like, okay, can you not shout at me like that? Because it's not, I don't really love that. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm so sorry, miss. I'm so sorry. Like, they've already corrected the behavior and you've ended up with like, it's fine. I get it. Just like, you can't shout at me though. Like, that's not all good, is it? And they're like, yeah, no, I know, miss. I know. Like, so giving people the opportunity to self-correct rather than, to your point, like all of a sudden now we're sin binning people, we're red carding people because they have worked themselves up, that they have shouted something that they don't actually mean. They're just escalating, is a big thing. And I do think that's something that we probably know we need to support our referees more with, is like, how do we, at community level, how do we give people the skills to absorb a little more of that and not react from that place of like, well, you're not going to shout at me, I'll shout back at you. Like, so yeah, work to be done, I think.
I just have like two more questions. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one question is, you've refereed obviously men and women. Do you notice, any kind of generalized differences in refereeing in those two environments?
I mean, there's sort of like anecdotal, general differences, I would say. It probably also depends on like how, whether it's an environment that I've like been in long enough that people sort of know who I am, as opposed to just being, I do sometimes find, because it's still not that common in New Zealand in particular for there to be women in refereeing rugby, that occasionally when I am refereeing a men's game, particularly if it's a competition that I don't operate in very often, like I might be the first woman they've ever had referee them, and that just creates a bit of like uncertainty for them. Whereas it's probably in our women's game, it's either more common that they've had a woman referee them before, or potentially like they already sort of know who I am based on the fact that I've like been involved in that grade. So I think some of the like, occasionally the men's players maybe are a little bit more uncertain, just because it's something that they're unfamiliar with. I also do think, like, as a general observation, women are much more willing to question you. Again, there are quiet women's players, but I'd say a percentage-wise, there's more chat coming back at you in a women's game than there sometimes can be in a men's game. whether that's obviously just my own experience as a woman officiating in the men's space. But yes, I do think our women's players, again, like a lot of them are thinking really quickly. They want answers. They're maybe less willing to be unsure than some of our men's players, which is a good challenge, I do think. But yeah, ultimately, I think both men's and women's players, like, they just want the best referee. They will, particularly at a top end, like, they just want someone who can do the job. And in the first sort of 5 or 10 minutes, they pretty much assess whether they think you can do the job, and most of them sort of move on from there.
My final question at that top level, I don't remember the name. You probably will. The referee at the last Men's World Cup, I think it was, who stepped down and cited the kind of abuse that he got for some of the calls that he made. You mentioned that people will shout things, but by the light of day, they might kind of realize that, you're doing your best. But is that kind of abuse a real challenge at that top level?
I think it can be. World Rugby certainly are like doing their best, particularly on some of the online digital abuse. So they use a program called Signify, which is sort of like a social media monitoring program that monitors sort of comments that come through on any of the referees' social media. And I do think it's probably something we see currently more in the men's game and in sort of our bigger professional competitions. But certainly as the women's games grow, like, we know that it'll be something that we see more of potentially. Personally, like, I've experienced very little of it. There's been a few games where I've probably received a little bit of online abuse. Most of it, I've got my sort of filter set that it just sort of sits in a message request folder, and I just delete them in bulk. But yeah, I would say, it can be horrible. It affects some of my colleagues, like, really, in a way, to your point, where people are retiring, people don't want to do it anymore. And unfortunately, I think, like, that, I understand, because that is the narrative that comes across in the media, but, at community level, like, it is actually not something we see that much of. Like, there are people who share their opinions, but to get to true levels of referee abuse is actually really rare at community rugby. Don't get me wrong, we have people behaving in ways that I think are not the best types of behavior. But in probably 10 years of refereeing community rugby across in Auckland, but also I get to referee across the country, like, I've experienced very little referee abuse. And I think generally, even those people that have, usually they stand corrected by the people around them, or are relatively apologetic when like you said, when in the cool light of day after the fact. But yeah, it is something we want to address, but I hesitate to see how big the narrative is, because it actually, for the majority of our volunteers at community rugby, like, that's not the reality. Like, it is actually a really positive environment. The referee clubs do a really good job about being supportive of you. Again, there are always people who will disagree with your decisions, but to be at that sort of true abuse end is less common, I think, than people think it might be.
That is so good to hear. Look, we're just about out of time. I do want to highlight something that you said earlier, which was you just finished talking about community rugby, but earlier when you were talking about community rugby, the ref, talking to the parents on the sideline and saying, this is how I'm going to referee today. I've been to hundreds of games. I don't think I've ever had a referee do that. And what a beautiful thing it would be to do. And so this is an invitation to anyone listening. If you are reffing community rugby, like, feel free to come to us and say, this is how I'm going to referee. My aim is to keep the game moving. So, you might see a whole bunch of knock-ons that don't get called or whatever. And that's deliberate and intentional, because our purpose here is for the kids to have fun and get some practice. The other thing I wanted to reinforce that you said was there are these things that we can only learn by doing. And this is so true, particularly in all the stuff, in so many domains, but all the stuff that we've been talking about how do you build that self-awareness? How do you build that muscle of being able to notice in real time when we're triggered by something, being able to process it. You talked about the refs at the top level, being able to process it, set it aside so I can show up at my best for this player in front of me. And the only way that we cultivate that is through repetition, through getting in the reps. and putting ourselves in a position where we can screw it up. We might screw it up over and over again to be able to go, okay, what happened that time? What did I do? Oh, that one was a little bit better. What did I do differently there? Oh, what about when I took some breaths there? What about when I walked 10 meters away? That just gave me 4 seconds. And that allowed me to just calm down so much. That was really interesting. And that curiosity to continue learning from those experiences, I really just, I loved that kind of approach to it. So I wanted to highlight that. Maggie, what a fantastic conversation. I have learned so much. I feel so uplifted by this conversation. I am so delighted that you are not only one of our best referees, but referee of the year. Like, what a well-deserved accolade. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This has been just terrific. I so appreciate it.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. She is so cool. I am officially a Maggie Cogger-Orr superfan. My favorite thing about that conversation was how much of it aligns exactly to the work that I do with leaders and leadership. This idea about how to hold people accountable without shame, blame, or anger, how leadership is really a journey of self-awareness, how empathy goes hand in hand with standards and holding people to account. We are seriously singing from the same songbook here. Thank you so much for listening. Please do let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@KylaKolbin.com. And if you are enjoying the podcast, the best thing you can do, like, subscribe, follow to the podcast itself, as well as to the social channels. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Thanks again, and see you next week. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Program. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, the Professor, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Reid. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Rach Engel, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, and me, Kyla Kolbin. Thanks for listening.